They said the hotel was fully booked. That was the first lie, the one they told with their eyes before the words ever left their lips. The lobby of the Grand Regent was a cathedral of quiet wealth. Marble floors gleamed like frozen lakes, reflecting the cold, crystalline light of a chandelier that dripped diamonds of glass. The air smelled of money and lemon polish, a sterile scent meant to erase the outside world. And into this curated silence walked James. He was not loud. His coat was worn, darkened by the relentless November rain. His shoes, though polished that morning, now carried the city's grit. But the real offense, the thing that drew the manager's gaze like a vulture to a wound, was the case he carried. It was an old violin case, not the sleek, carbon fiber shells of modern virtuosos, but a thing of wood and worn leather, its corners scarred with the stories of 1,000 train platforms and bus station floors. It was his father's case. It was his inheritance. It was his entire life, packed into a velvet-lined coffin of a thing. He approached the front desk, a long slab of mahogany that served as a barricade between the worthy and the wanting. Behind it stood Arthur Kensington, a man built of sharp angles and starched collars. His smile was a thin, bloodless line, reserved for guests whose credit cards matched the color of their platinum watches. James set the case down gently. The sound was a soft thud, an unwelcome intrusion of reality into the lobby's dream. "Reservation," James said, his voice low, tired from a 14-hour train ride. "The name is Harris, James Harris." Kensington didn't even look at his computer. His eyes drifted from James's face down to his damp coat and settled on the scarred violin case. He lingered there as if the case itself was a personal insult. "Harris," Kensington repeated, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. He tapped a few keys with performative slowness, a lie in motion. "I'm afraid I don't see anything under that name." "Could you check again?" James asked, keeping his voice even. "It was booked by the Valerius Foundation." The name Valerius, the most legendary conductor alive, should have been a key. Instead, Kensington's smirk tightened. He saw not a connection, but a pathetic attempt at one. A lie. "The Valerius Foundation," he said, his tone dripping with a saccharine disbelief. "Of course, sir, we are a 5-star establishment. We are selective." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, the kind used to deliver an execution. "Perhaps there's a motel down the street, more your speed." James froze. The air went still. The insult landed, cold, precise. It wasn't just a rejection, it was an erasure. Kensington had looked at him, a black man in a worn coat holding his father's soul in a wooden box, and decided he was worth less than the marble beneath his feet. James didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. The exhaustion in his bones was heavier than any anger. He had fought this battle 1,000 times in 1,000 different lobbies, and tonight he didn't have the strength. He simply nodded, picked up the violin case, and turned to walk away. He didn't see the faint, triumphant smile on Kensington's face. He only felt the cold. As the automatic glass doors slid open, a gust of wind and rain swept in, as if the city itself was trying to push him back out into the night. He stepped into the downpour, the lie echoing in his ears. Fully booked. The rain wasn't just water, it was the city weeping on his shoulders, a baptism of indifference. James stood under the hotel's ornate awning, the warm, golden light of the lobby a world away. He watched taxis glide by, their occupants cocooned in warmth and privilege, oblivious. He clutched the violin case tighter. Inside, nestled in worn velvet, was the granary. A violin made in 1741, a treasure that was worth more than the entire hotel lobby. A secret he held close because he knew that in rooms like that, some truths were too unbelievable to be seen. He remembered his father, a man with hands as rough as bark but a touch as gentle as a lullaby. He'd been a session musician, a ghost in the background of famous records, his talent immense but his opportunities small. He'd saved for 20 years to buy that violin, not for himself, but for the son he knew would one day play in halls he could only dream of entering. This box, his father had told him, his voice raspy from a life of cheap cigarettes and cheaper hopes, it carries more than just wood and strings, son. It carries our name. Don't ever let anyone make you feel small for holding it. James looked down at his own hands. They were his father's hands, reborn, calloused at the fingertips, scarred from a childhood accident, but long and graceful. These hands could make a 300-year-old instrument weep or sing or scream. These hands had earned him a seat as the first violin, the concertmaster, for the world's greatest living conductor, Maestro Stefan Valerius. But right now they were just cold. He thought about the call he'd made to the maestro a week ago. "I'm nervous, Stefan," James had confessed over the phone. Valerius's laugh had boomed through the receiver, a sound like thunder and honey. "Nervous? James, my boy, you could play Paganini in a hurricane and the storm would pause to listen. They are not ready for you. But you were born ready. Born ready." He didn't feel ready now. He felt like a boy in the rain, locked out of a palace that held a room with his name on it. He leaned his head against the cold brick of the building, the lie of fully booked a bitter pill in his throat. He had come so far only to be stopped at the door by the oldest story in the book. He closed his eyes. The city sounds faded. The rain became a rhythm, a slow, mournful adagio, and then a sound cut through it, the screech of tires. A black town car, long and sleek as a panther, pulling up to the curb with an aggressive finality. The hotel's glass doors slid open again, but this time they didn't offer an escape. They announced an arrival. If James's entrance was a whisper, Maestro Stefan Valerius's was an opera. He swept into the lobby like a force of nature, a man in his late 60s with a mane of silver hair, a long cashmere scarf thrown over his shoulder, and eyes that burned with an intensity that could cow dictators. He didn't walk, he strode. The sterile air of the lobby seemed to crackle and bend around him. Kensington, who had been preening behind the desk, straightened up as if struck by lightning. His thin smile was instantly replaced by a wide, fawning grin that looked painful on his face. "Maestro Valerius," he gushed, his voice an octave higher than it was with James. "What an honor, we've been expecting you. Welcome, welcome to the Grand Regent." Valerius paid him no mind. He was shaking the rain from his coat, his gaze sweeping the lobby with a possessive air. He was not a guest, he was the main event. "The air in here is suffocating, Arthur," he boomed, not even bothering to look at Kensington's name tag. "It smells of false apologies and cheap polish. I trust my suite is ready. The penthouse, yes. I require silence, a piano that is in tune for once, and a bottle of your finest scotch. Not the swill you serve to tourists." "Of course, Maestro," Everything is prepared to your exact specifications, Kensington said, practically bowing. The penthouse is ready. Your bags are on their way up. Is there anything else? Anything at all? Valerius finally turned his fiery gaze on the manager. His eyes narrowed. Yes, he said, his voice dropping, becoming dangerously quiet. There is something else. He scanned the lobby again, his eyes moving past the velvet chairs, the ornate flower arrangements, the hushed guests who were now staring, starstruck. His gaze landed on the glass doors. On the figure standing just outside in the rain. A flicker of confusion, then recognition, then a gathering storm of fury clouded the maestro's face. He looked back at Kensington, whose fawning smile was beginning to falter under the weight of that stare. "Arthur," Valerius said, the name now a weapon. "Why is my concertmaster standing outside in the rain?" Kensington's smile froze. It didn't just falter, it shattered. The blood drained from his face, leaving behind a waxy, pale mask of confusion. "Why your concertmaster?" he stammered, his eyes darting toward the glass doors, toward the silhouetted figure of James. Valerius took a slow, deliberate step toward the desk. The entire lobby held its breath. The guests, the bellhops, the air itself, all of it went still. "Do not play games with me, Arthur." The maestro's voice was a low growl, a rumble of thunder before the strike. James Harris, the finest violinist of his generation. The man whose hands are insured for a price that could buy this entire pathetic establishment 3 times over. Why is he outside? Each word was a hammer blow. Kensington's mind was a frantic scramble of denial and dawning horror. He looked from the maestro's furious face to James, who was now stepping back inside, drawn by the commotion. He saw the worn coat, the old case, the quiet dignity, and he finally understood. The man he had dismissed, the man he had sent to a motel, the man he had deemed not their kind, was the star. The centerpiece of the very event the maestro was in town for. I didn't." Kensington's voice was a pathetic squeak. There was no reservation, maestro. The hotel, it's fully booked." The lie came out again, this time weak and desperate, a dying gasp. Valerius laughed. It was not a sound of humor. It was a terrible, sharp, cutting sound. "Fully booked." He roared, and the crystal chandelier seemed to tremble. "For my first violin. For the man who will be leading my orchestra tomorrow night in a performance that this entire city has been waiting a year to see. You dare stand there and feed me that insipid, transparent, bureaucratic lie." He strode to the glass doors, pushing them open himself. He put a hand on James's shoulder, his expression softening for a fraction of a second before hardening again as he turned back to face the manager. He guided James back into the center of the lobby, back onto the gleaming marble. He stood beside him, a lion protecting its cub. "This," Valerius announced to the entire silent room, "is James Harris. He is not a vagrant, he is not lost, he is an artist, and he is with me." He looked down at the worn violin case in James's hand. With a tenderness that defied his furious demeanor, he reached out and took it. He held it up for Kensington to see, his eyes burning. "Do you know what this is, Arthur? This is history. This is legacy. This is a sound you are not worthy of hearing. And you told him to find a motel." Kensington could not speak. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound emerged. He looked like a man who had just watched his entire life crumble into dust. "His reservation," Valerius continued, his voice dropping to an icy calm that was more terrifying than his roar, was under my name, penthouse suite, adjoining. It has been booked for 6 months. You didn't check. You just looked at him and decided. He took a step closer, leaving James for a moment. He leaned over the mahogany desk, his face inches from Kensington's. You did not see a musician, you saw a problem, and that was your first and final mistake. The power in the room had not just shifted, it had been completely upended. Kensington, once the smug gatekeeper, was now the one being judged, and his judge was merciless. "Arthur," Valerius said, his voice a silken threat, "you will personally escort Mr. Harris to his suite, not a bellhop, not an assistant. You." Kensington stared, his eyes wide with panic. "And you will carry his instrument," Valerius added, holding out the precious guarnery case. The manager's hands trembled as he reached for it. He took the case as if it were a bomb, his touch clumsy and profane on the worn leather. The contrast was stark. The man who had dismissed the case with a sneer was now forced to carry it like a sacred relic. "The penthouse," Valerius commanded, turning to James and putting a reassuring arm around his shoulders. "Lead the way, Arthur, and do try to keep up." With the entire lobby watching, the stunned guests, the wide-eyed staff, Kensington began the walk of shame. He led them toward the private elevator, his back ramrod straight but his face a mask of pure humiliation. He carried the violin case awkwardly, a symbol of his colossal error. Inside the elevator, the silence was suffocating. Kensington stared at the floor, the reflection of his own horrified face looking back at him from the polished brass walls. James stood quietly, his exhaustion replaced by a strange, calm sense of vindication. Valerius watched Kensington, his eyes missing nothing. When the doors opened to the penthouse suite, a sprawling space with panoramic city views, Kensington practically fled to set the violin case down on a table. Will that be all, maestro?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "No," Valerius said, closing the suite door behind him, trapping the manager inside. "It will not." He walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at the glittering city below. James remained near the door, a silent observer to the masterclass in controlled demolition. "Tell me, Arthur," Valerius said without turning around, "how long have you worked in hospitality?" 20 years, maestro." 20 years, Valerius mused. "And in all that time, has anyone ever taught you what the word actually means, hospitality, to be hospitable, to offer sanctuary to a traveler? Or did you just learn how to bow to the rich and sneer at everyone else?" Kensington swallowed hard. I apologize, maestro. It was a misunderstanding." "Do not call me maestro," Valerius snapped, whirling around. "You have not earned that right, and do not call this a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding is when you bring me the wrong year of scotch. This was prejudice. It was ugly, it was cheap, and it happened in my presence." He gestured to James. "This man, this artist, has traveled the world. He has played for kings and queens. He has slept on floors and in first-class suites. He has earned his place in every room he enters. Who are you to decide he doesn't belong?" James watched, a silent witness. This wasn't his fight anymore. It was Valerius's. It was a fight for the dignity of art, for the respect that talent deserves, regardless of the vessel it comes in. "I am the face of this orchestra," Valerius said, his voice dropping again. "And James Harris is its heart. When you insult him, you insult me, you insult the music itself, and that is an offense I do not forgive." He walked to the phone, picked it up, and dialed. "Yes, I'd like to speak to the hotel owner," he said into the receiver, his eyes locked on Kensington. "Stefan Valerius calling. It's urgent. It concerns the immediate termination of your night manager." Kensington's knees looked as though they might buckle. The last shred of his composure disintegrated. He had tried to push a king out into the rain, not realizing he was standing in the shadow of an emperor. The next morning, the rain had stopped. A pale, watery sun filtered through the penthouse windows. James woke not to the sound of an alarm, but to music. In the adjoining living room, Maestro Valerius was at the grand piano, his fingers dancing across the keys, playing a soft, intricate melody by Sadie. It was a sound of peace after a storm. James walked in, and Valerius looked up, smiling. "Ah, the concertmaster is awake," he said. "Sleep well." "Better than I expected," James admitted. "Good, vengeance is an excellent lullaby," the maestro chuckled. He gestured to a silver platter on the table. The hotel owner sent a fruit basket, a bottle of champagne, and a groveling letter of apology. "I sent it all back, except the champagne." James smiled. "What happened to him?" "Arthur Kensington is, as of 800 a.m. this morning, no longer employed by the Grand Regent, or any other hotel in this city, if I have anything to say about it," Valerius said grimly. "Some lessons must be permanent." There was a knock at the door. It was the new hotel manager, a woman with kind eyes and a nervous energy. She apologized profusely, offering them complimentary everything for the duration of their stay. James just nodded, accepting the apology with a quiet grace that seemed to unnerve her more than any outburst would have. He wasn't interested in their apologies. He wasn't interested in their fear. He was interested in his violin. He walked over to the case, the one Kensington had carried with trembling hands. He opened it. The guarnery gleamed, its dark wood radiating a warmth that filled the room. He picked it up, feeling the familiar weight in his hands, the smooth curve of the neck. He didn't need a penthouse suite or fawning managers to know his worth. He knew it every time he drew his bow across the strings. He lifted the violin to his chin and began to play. He didn't play a furious piece. He didn't play a sad one. He played Bach, the Chaconne from Partita No. 2, a piece of music so profound, so complex, so full of sorrow and hope, it felt like the architecture of a human soul. The sound poured out of the suite, through the open windows and into the city air. Down in the lobby, the new manager stopped what she was doing. The bellhops paused, guests looked up. The music was the only answer that ever mattered. It was a testament to his journey, a hymn to his father's faith, a quiet, unshakable declaration of his right to be there. He wasn't playing for them. He wasn't playing for Valerius. He wasn't even playing for the ghost of Arthur Kensington. He was playing for the boy who had once stood in the rain, clutching a wooden box, wondering if he belonged. That night the concert hall was electric. A sold-out crowd waited in hushed anticipation. Backstage, James stood in his concert tuxedo, the guarnery warm in his hands. Valerius approached, placing a hand on his shoulder. "No nerves tonight, I hope?" the maestro asked, a twinkle in his eye. James shook his head, a small smile playing on his lips. "None, they're just people." "Ah," Valerius said, "you've learned, that is the final lesson. Once you know who you are, the rest of the world is just an audience." When James walked onto the stage, the concertmaster's chair waiting for him, the applause was thunderous. He took his seat, the leader of 100 musicians, the heart of the orchestra. He looked out at the sea of faces and he felt no fear. He felt no anger. He felt nothing but the music waiting in his hands. He lifted his violin. He met the maestro's gaze. Valerius gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. James drew his bow across the strings. The first note was pure, perfect, and absolute. It cut through the silence of the hall, a sound of such heartbreaking beauty that it seemed to stop time. It was the sound of a promise kept, the sound of a battle won not with fists or shouts, but with grace. Some victories are not loud. They are not born of revenge, but of resilience. They are a quiet, soaring music that fills the rooms that once tried to keep you out. And that sound, that beautiful, undeniable sound, is a language everyone understands. It was the only word he needed to say.